Hey, I'm Jake Bodine. I'm back at the God Behind Bars podcast with Shelby Brown. We just had an amazing conversation where we talk about the idea of forgiveness, especially from a victim's point of view. And so whether you're sitting in the shoes of a victim or you're sitting in the shoes of an offender, either way, we've all been on both sides of that equation. And we talk about the idea of forgiveness and how we forgive those that have offended us and how we forgive ourselves if we have offended others. And so, Shelby, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes, thanks for having me.
It's been encouraging to hear your story, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it too.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm sharing a little bit about my story, how I lost my dad as a police officer, and walking in forgiveness and forgiving the man who shot my father, and all the things that I've seen God do through it.
Shelby, it's so great having you here. I would love to just know more. Obviously, often on this podcast, we talk to people who have been to prison, who have changed their life, and God's radically changed their life. But you bring a whole new perspective from the victim side of it. And so I would love to just hear, maybe start back at your childhood and kind of describe what that was like all the way up until the point that your life was forever changed.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I grew up in a great house, great parents, 2 siblings, younger sister, younger brother. I came to know Jesus at a pretty early age, at the age of 9. Always went to church. It was just our lifestyle. We loved it. And so my dad was a police officer in the DFW area in Mesquite. And he was a police officer for 21 years, and it was all we ever knew. And we loved him being a police officer. My mom was a teacher. And so on December 3rd, I was a student at Dallas Baptist University, and I was out running some errands, and I got a text from my pastor, and he was asking me where I was at. I was a little bit confused by that, so I checked my family's location. My dad was still at work, and my mom had gone to the hospital, and I didn't know why, and so I knew something had happened, but I didn't know what. And so my mom ended up texting me, and she said, "Hey, where are you?" And so at that point, I knew that something was going on. And so I called her, and she said, "Well, family's coming into town. I really think you should come home this weekend." And it was just really out of the blue, and it didn't seem right. And so I was like, "Mom, I know that there's more to this. Like, I need you to tell me what's going on." And she said, "Well, Shelby, I have a priority, and I need you to get back to campus." And so I was about 45 minutes away from college. And so I raced back to campus, and I hit like every red light, made every wrong turn. And I was so frustrated because I knew that there was something really wrong happening. And so I pulled up to my college campus, and I pulled my phone out and called my mom. My mom didn't answer the first time, and finally she picked up the phone, and I was really angry at this point. And I said, "Mom, I need you to tell me what's going on." And she said, "Well, Shelby, your dad was in an accident today." And I said, "Okay, well, where is he?" My first thought was not that anything life-threatening had happened. I thought that maybe it was just an incident at work. I thought maybe he was at the doctor or the hospital. And that's whenever she told me, "Shelby, he's not here anymore." And I'll never forget that phone call. I immediately hung up the phone. I didn't really know what to say or what to do. Sorry.
Take your time.
And she had somehow gotten across to me that my pastor was on his way with his wife to pick me up from school. And she had to call me because it was all over the news, and I just hadn't seen it yet. And so I go inside and I pack my bags, and my pastor and his wife show up, and they start driving me home. It took forever to get home, and whenever we got there, I saw dozens of police cars down the cul-de-sac and in my driveway, all with their lights on, and so many different people in the front yard. And they pulled up to the front of the house, and before they had even stopped the car, I had flung the door open, and I start running inside, and my legs were so weak, and I fell. My mom caught me and brought me inside, and I walk in and I see my brother on the couch. My sister and my brother had known for about an hour, 2 hours at this point. And I look to my left, and the Christmas tree's up, and we're like 22 days away from Christmas at this point. Like the worst possible time this could happen. And so I just remember laying on the floor, and I was in such disbelief that I just kept asking, like, where is Dad? Where is he? Where is he? And so I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, I had gotten up and gone to the front porch, just trying to get fresh air and breathe. And like I said, I've been a believer my entire life is what it feels like. And I knew that God was there, but I didn't see his hand. I didn't trust his heart. And so I just remember, asking God, where are you? What are you doing? Why would you do something like this? And growing up, I had always had a heart for inmates. And what I didn't know is that my dad had not just, tragically suddenly passed away and didn't know how. So my dad had responded to a call at a nearby grocery store in Mesquite. And upon arriving to the scene, he saw that a man and his wife, basically there was an altercation. The wife found him having an affair. And so my dad thought that it was going to be a quick fix, gone, and tried to talk to the ex-wife, the husband, and their daughter was also there. And so he was talking to the wife and the daughter whenever he saw that the man had gotten back into his truck and he was trying to flee the scene. And so my dad ran over there and tapped on the edge of his truck bed. And he was standing in a position where he could see him and the other two. And so within seconds, the man opens the driver's side door and turns around and kills my dad. He shot him 4 times. My dad died instantly. My dad was only on scene for about a minute, 2 minutes, so he didn't even get a chance to talk to the guy, and he just decided to end his life. And so I didn't know that on my way home, or even whenever I called my mom, I didn't even think to ask about that. I didn't think that's what had happened until I was on my way home and I had checked my phone. And it was just news article after news article after news article that told me that my dad was shot and killed. And so, like I said later, the next day, that next morning, I was on my porch and asking God what in the world was going on, why he would do something like this where he was. And growing up, I had always had a heart for inmates, and that was very weird for me as a daughter of a police officer, because I feel like what is normal is that there's 2 sides that you're trying to pick from, and that's always what I felt like was the case. And so it was very interesting that I had a heart for inmates, and I didn't understand why. But then, of course, after this happened to my dad, I knew that God was preparing me all along for this moment. And so I felt in my spirit that God had wanted me to speak at my dad's funeral. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare. We were trying to get things moving super quickly within the week. And so the night before the funeral, I had sat down and tried to put my thoughts in order. And I didn't know what to say. And I asked God, God, if you want me to do this, you're going to have to give me the words to do it. And he brought this image to my mind that I'll never forget. And it was Jesus on the cross, but not just on the cross, but specifically his eyes. And they were just sad eyes. And I felt like he said to me, Shelby, I did this for you. I hung on the cross for you, but I did it for the man who shot your father too. And I remember being angry in that moment at first, because I was like, you have got to be kidding me. After everything that you just put me through, you want me to forgive the man who shot my dad. And in the Bible it says if you want God to forgive your sins, you must forgive others. And so I knew that that was not just a suggestion, but that it was a command. And so that night that I had sat down to write this eulogy, I decided that I was going to publicly forgive the man who shot my father. And so days following, we had the funeral, and I got up there and I did the eulogy, and it was a beautiful, beautiful funeral. And it's so funny looking back on that eulogy, because it's totally not me, it's totally Jesus just showing up and giving me the words. And I meant every word that I said. I said, my prayer is that someday down the road that I'd get to spend some time with the man who shot my father, not to scream at him, not to yell at him, but to tell him about Jesus. And so that quickly, took off, and a lot of people saw that eulogy. And so now my heart, is really for prison ministry, and to share that story not only with the man who shot my father, but for every inmate. And so about a year later, we had the trial, and that's the first time that I saw the man who shot my father. And I'll never forget him walking in those doors. And, we had the trial, and we had the chance to decide if we wanted to give him life without parole or the death penalty. And something in my spirit just said, God's not done with him yet. And so we chose life without parole. We chose life. And at the end of the trial, I got the chance to speak to this man. And I was able to tell him about the gospel, tell him about who my dad was, and what he believed in. And I knew that there was more for this man than a life full of crime, and that his life wasn't over, that there was more for him. And so I was able to watch just tears stream down his face as he heard the gospel for the first time. And later on, I ended up meeting his kids, and I had a conversation with them, and, told them that what I said wasn't just for show. I really meant it. And not only did I mean it for him, I meant it for his family. I want more for him, for his family. And so that was a really beautiful conversation. And we still try and keep in touch because they're local, but that's kind of the gist of my story. And so now I have such an honor and a privilege to share that story, and travel and prison ministry is just where my heart's at, and I love what God's doing. And it's been really special.
What amazing testimony, obviously tragic. When you talk about the dream of the sad eyes of Jesus on the cross, it gave me goosebumps, because it takes me back to, there's an artist by the name of Josh Garles, and he's got a song called Farther Along, and it talks about castaways in the song. But specifically, as he describes Jesus, he says, the good man dies, the bad man thrives, and Jesus cries because he loves them both. And your entire story is like a perfect picture of that lyric of the song. And very understanding, obviously grace that surpasses all understanding. We know that, but just the power of forgiveness, and not only what it does for you, but what it does for others. Right. And we don't often fully understand the bad things that happen to us in our life, or the bad things that happen to others, and why, and why does God allow that? And I think it's a valid question to be asked. It's a fair question to be asked. And but what you do with it, and you may not ever get the answer, but the answer that was given to you was, I want you to forgive this man. And I don't think it was necessarily just for the man, but it's for you, right? God cares enough that you don't carry a bitter, burdened heart the rest of your life. And maybe you're not in prison physically because of it, but you could be in prison in your mind, in your spirit, if you do not offer the chance for forgiveness. And so maybe speak to that a little bit of just, obviously there's probably a moment of wrestling, right? You're dealing with all of the different emotions, which I think are valid and fair, but how do you get yourself to the point of actually saying, okay, God, I'm going to trust you with this, even though it makes zero sense to me. I'm mad at you. I'm angry. But I know what you want me to do here. Like, how do you get yourself to the point of action?
I think when my dad passed away, there was a sudden reality for me that life is very short. And we say it all the time, we hear it, but until it happens to you, you don't quite understand what we're really given here on earth, and how precious time is. But also, I have never clinged to the promise of heaven as much as I do now. And so I think that was a huge shift for me, and something that really had me fall back into forgiveness was just the realization that here is not our home. Our home is somewhere else. And really, right now, here on earth, on this side of heaven, is our only chance to worship God through tears, pain, and suffering. There will be a day where there won't be any more tears, there won't be any pain, there won't be any sorrow. And so now is really our only chance to worship him through that, and he gets glory through that ultimately. And that's what his heart is. That's what he wants for us. And I think that I just kind of came to the realization, like, this is not about me, and it's never been about me, and it won't ever be about me. My purpose here on earth is to glorify someone much higher, someone much greater, someone who gives life. And so that's kind of what flipped the switch for me, is fixing my eyes on heaven.
And I think that beyond flipping the switch, like, it's really flipping the script. Often with God, is very religious, right? Like this, everything you're describing is relationship.
Right.
Like, so you've literally flipped the script from religion to relationship. Like, it isn't a fictional character that we've made up in our mind. This is someone that we journey with and walk in life with. And even though we don't often understand the things that we face, it's someone who sits in the pit with us in every waking moment. And it's not that all of our problems go away. Obviously, huge problems as a believer, something that you would think as a believer, this should never happen to me.
Right.
But it isn't about the problems going away. It's not about him being a magic genie. It's about having someone that you can walk through life with that says, I'm going to be in every pit with you, and I'm going to be the one to pull you out in the time of need. And so what's it like for the rest of your family? Like, do they have the same mindset toward the whole situation that you do, or was there a balance there, and the ups and downs, the roller coasters? Does it take longer for others to come to that place, or have they ever come to that place? What's it like for them?
Yeah, I think that grief is a very weird thing, and it's something that we've had to navigate in our own ways. Immediately after my dad passed away, we got right into counseling, and that has been an immense blessing to our life. And I think that we're still learning that all of us grieve differently, but we all have one thing in common, and it's that we're believers. And so I think that although some have taken longer to get to this place, and I'm not sure if everyone ever will, and but I do know that we do believe that God has purpose in this, and that his forgiveness is for all of us. We believe it. And I think something that we're all learning is that this is not a one-time decision of forgiveness. It's a daily one. And we've seen that there are days that are easier for my mom and my sister than it is for my brother and I. But it's a decision that I have to make every day, is that I'm going to forgive the man who shot my father again today. And I will have to make that decision again tomorrow. But yeah, grief is very weird, and we all have different ways that looks for us. I think my brother was angry more than anything as a, 13-year-old boy at the time, just lost his dad. Anger was just all he felt. My sister was very similar to my dad, and felt feelings very deeply. And so I think also we've all found different avenues to share our memories and our grief and our hope in Jesus. And that looks very different, but all comes back to the same person, who's Jesus.
No, your mindset just and who you are and what God's designed you to be is like a miracle in motion, to be honest with you. I just sit here and I'm blown away by the way your perspective and the way that one, you articulate, but two is that you even view this entire situation. It's pretty remarkable. As it pertains to other victims that might not be at that place of forgiveness yet. Maybe you could speak to just, number one, their journey, but two is the freedom that you've found in being able to forgive the man that took so much from you.
Whenever I think about other victims, I think that in our lifetime, it's very hard to find other people who have walked through similar things. And so that was very hard for me whenever this first happened, is because I was like, no other family, like no other friend, nobody has ever gone through something like this. But what I've found through this ministry and the places that God has taken me is that really freedom starts at forgiveness. And whenever you try and look back and figure out, well, like, what's the first step to freedom? Like, it really is forgiveness. And we see that on the cross. And so whenever Jesus was on the cross, the first thing he said was like, or one of the things he said before he died was, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they're doing. And so for that to come out of his mouth right before his last breath, I knew that, well, the key to forgiveness the key to freedom must be forgiveness. And so to victims, to families that have walked through something similar, know that really the first step to freedom is forgiveness. And although that may be just like a hard thing to come to terms with, and I definitely don't think that it's not something that is easy to come by, but I think the hardest part of it, and the thing that gets most people, choked up and held back from walking in forgiveness, is they just don't know what it is, and who it's for and where it comes from. And so that was the biggest hurdle I had to jump over, is knowing that me forgiving the man who shot my father does not mean that what he did was right. And it does not mean that I'm going to forget about it and move on. Those were hurdles that I had to jump over. And I think that's hurdles that a lot of people need to realize that are even in front of their face, that they have to step over in order to walk into forgiveness. But really, you'll see that once you enter into that, the things that God does from it is wild. And the way that it shifts your mind, I really do not think that I would be where I am today had I not made that decision. And I don't think that I would ever be in ministry. I'm not sure if I would ever even walk into a church again if I did not have that encounter with Jesus. And I think what I've learned more than anything is that he's been there the whole time, and it's been available the whole time. All we have to do is reach out and grab it and ask for his help, because he will always supply the need. And so that's really the biggest thing that I think I want to say to people that have experienced the same things, is there's a way, and the way is Jesus.
Yeah, it's amazing. Not everybody has experienced, obviously, the level of tragedy that you've experienced and had to come to a place of forgiveness. But everyone has been offended by somebody in their life. And just to even amplify and add on to just God's perspective of forgiveness, I believe, is just even through the parable where Jesus talks about the debtor and the dettee, and how one man was forgiven of 60 million. And then he then goes and has someone who's in debt to him. And the man only owes him like 20,000. And the man grabs him by the throat, the one that had been forgiven of the 60 million, and tries to hold the man accountable to the 20,000. And Jesus kind of depicts this picture of, it's when we don't forgive those who have offended us, it's almost like spitting in the face of the man that's forgiven us all of so much, which is him. And that it is not only something that he wants for us, but at some level it's something that he commands of us, is to get to that place of forgiveness. And it's not easy. It's not a flip of a switch. There is a process to it, but I think the heart behind it should be, for all of us, no matter what has happened in our life, is getting to a place of wanting to get to a place of forgiveness. You know what I mean? And the freedom that we experience because of it.
Right.
The heart especially, right? It's never leaves the mind, but if we can allow it to leave the heart,
Right.
then God can still work through us and in us, versus when our heart is enchained to the things that have happened to us, then ultimately it turns cold and hard, and it's very hard for God to work with a cold and hardened heart.
Yeah.
And so wanting to get to the place of forgiveness is ultimately what is best for us, right? As we journey throughout life and the things that happen to us. And man, for me, I guess for someone who's on the fence with the whole idea of Jesus, because we have listeners who are believers and we've got listeners who aren't. Why do you speak to the idea of that? Why Jesus?
Honestly, I had a lot of people come up to me after I shared that I forgave the man who shot my father, and even behind bars, and they have a really hard time understanding why I would do something like that, why I would even be in a relationship with Jesus, who that guy even is. And, you know, I tell them all the time, like, there's a decision that you have to make. There's two chains that you can hold. One that's a life of bitterness and hate and resentment, or there is another chain that is life and freedom and peace. But you can't hold both weights at the same time. You have to pick one. And I think that whenever you break it down to the simplicity of, you know, the eternal life that comes after this and the reality of hell and the reality of life with Jesus, there is a distinct gap that people don't always understand. And so whenever they face trials and tribulations and, you know, loss, like what I've gone through, there becomes this great need. And I think that that's kind of where you have to sit from, is you are a very broken person in need of a very great Savior. And there is no thing, there is no, you know, there's no money, there's no substance that will ever fix that hole. And as far as you go searching, like, you will just end up in a deeper pit. And there was another way that my life could have turned out. And that's something that I will always testify from, is that there are two ways that you can go, one that leads to life and one that leads to death. But really just knowing that there is a Father in heaven that loves you, that died for you, that wants good things for you, that offers an eternity spent with him where there is no pain, no sorrow, no suffering. I think whenever you come to grasp with those terms, I think that you're able to make a decision that can really alter your life forever.
I love that. I mean, honestly, so you talk about the idea that you're now called to prison ministry, and you've done some things with our organization, and the feedback has been amazing. But what are some of the things that you've seen as you share this story and the power of forgiveness, and coming from a perspective to these men and women that for many of them have been on the other side of being the actual offender? What have you seen through your ministry now, going back into prisons and getting to share this with different kinds of people?
I will never forget walking into San Quinton Prison for the first time. And I was very timid, very nervous. I didn't know what to expect. And I honestly just went because I felt like God told me to go, but there was some hesitancy behind it. I knew that I had felt a certain way for inmates, and I had shown that through, you know, feeling the way that I do about the man who shot my father. But I was like, I have no idea what's about to happen. I don't know if it's going to trigger anything in me. But I was like, you know what, I will go. And so I went, and I got to share my story. And it was a room full of men that were in there for so many different things. Some were very similar to the reason that my dad was no longer with us. And by the end of me telling my story, all of the men stood up in their chairs, and they turned around and they stretched out a hand to me, and they prayed over me, and they prayed over my life and my ministry. And I didn't even know that was a thing that God would have orchestrated for that moment. But I still have the picture in my mind of that moment, and it completely caught me off guard. But I remember feeling in that moment like, God, you really want to use this? Like, you really want to use me? And if it's somewhere else, that's fine. But here, I think, is where I need to be. And so the pastor of the chapel at San Quinton, directed his guys to turn around and pray over me and pray over my family, and that we would, experience blessings and favor, and that he would use my story. And I walked out of there a completely different person. And this was only a few months after my dad had passed away. But God had lit this fire inside of me, and I knew that prison ministry was what he was calling me to. And so then a few months later, I had ended up, partnering with you guys and going to a few different events and sharing my story and seeing the same thing over and over, that like, really, there was a reality set in me that these are God's people too. And they are not a number, they are a name. And they have a life that can be filled with purpose with him in it. And so seeing that shifted everything in me. My ministry, my mindset, my heart, my relationship with God. I was like, oh my gosh, like there is purpose in my story. And that was really the first time that I had seen that, and I knew that God wanted to do more with it. And so here I am now, just that's what my heart beats for, and it's what I've seen God use, and I love it more than I ever thought I would. And so it's been a tremendous blessing in my life.
Well, what would you say to the person that is sitting on the other side of this and wrestling with the idea of forgiveness? And when I say that is from the perspective of they are the offender,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know if, one, they can forgive themselves,
Mm-hmm.
Two, if God will ever forgive them.
Yeah.
What would you say to that person?
Standing in the shoes of a victim, standing in the shoes of having my dad shot and killed, standing in the shoes of someone who's experienced tremendous loss, what I tell every woman, every man behind bars when I see them is, if they've never heard it before, I want them to hear me say, I forgive you, standing in the shoes of a victim, as a victim. That I forgive you, but also, as great as it is for a victim to forgive the offender, there is a much greater forgiveness at hand that comes from their Heavenly Father. And so it's one thing to take it from me, but to take it from a man who hung on the cross, died for your sins, saved the entire world, because we should all be locked behind bars, truthfully. We should all be dead in our sin. But there's a man who hung on the cross, who took care of that for us, who wants to extend the forgiveness, and it's there for them. And so for those that are on the fence, not knowing like if there will ever be a day that they see the other side, if there will ever be a day that they see their family or their friends or experience life behind bars, I can tell you that there is still life to be found. There's still life behind bars that's waiting, that's open. And it's for you to experience, but it starts with forgiveness, starts with forgiving yourself. Take it from me, who's experienced what I've been through. Like I really do mean what I say. Like I do forgive those offenders. But yeah, just knowing that it's not about me, it's about God, and he extends that same forgiveness and wants a relationship with you and with them.
Well, and even through the tragedy, that there is good to still be had, right? You still have purpose. God still wants to prosper you. He still wants to give you life on this side of heaven.
Yeah.
And I think one of the greatest way that we can honor victims is to ensure that we never offend people again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so there's still ways for you to even honor your victim or your victim's family through what God wants to do in and through your life. And so this is absolutely amazing, and I just appreciate you coming on to the podcast. But maybe one last question that I have for you: what would you want for Shelby Brown's legacy, or even your father's legacy, through the tragedy that has taken place?
I think the day that we come face to face with Jesus again, my prayer is that the men and the women that I see behind bars, that those that are kind of on the fence about this whole Jesus thing, truly my prayer is not that you would have a better life or make friends or make memories. It is that you would come to know the one true living God that wants to have a relationship with you. And I think more than anything, my legacy, my father's legacy, I think one day, if I ever had the chance to talk to my dad, I think that he would say that this is all worth it. And I think that it was worth the loss. It was worth the pain. It was worth the suffering in order for people to come to know Jesus. And I think that we'll see that reward in heaven one day, and that's really all that I want while I'm here on this side.
It's amazing. And I think if you're listening right now and you're just struggling, even with the idea of it, you're like, oh, Jake, Shelby, you don't know what I have done. Like we might not, but we do know one thing, that there is a God in heaven. His name is Jesus, and he loves you, and he wants to have a relationship with you. And I want to encourage you to take that next step in your life. And it's as simple as just acknowledging him in your heart, in your mind, and with your mouth through prayer, and asking him to be the Lord of your life. And so, Shelby, I think it's unbelievable just who you are as a person and the heart that you have, not only for just the person that took so much from you, but for anybody that may be facing similar circumstances on both sides of the fence. And so I want to thank you for being on the show, and thank you for sharing your story and being so vulnerable. And again, we're sorry for your loss, but we're so proud of what God is doing in and through you through it all. So
yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again for listening to the God Behind Bars podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll subscribe from wherever you're listening to this. Leave us a review and share with your family and friends. We're so thankful to all of those that make it possible for us to continue to reach inmates with the gospel. If you'd like to donate to support the work of God Behind Bars, you can visit godbehindbars.com/donate.